So I'm really excited today to be here at our Centennial studio with Chloe Chamberlain, who's head of product for Wordfence Intelligence and our vulnerability database. We have a really big and exciting announcement to make. So I wanted to just kind of start by giving you some background on why we're announcing this and a little bit of what our mission is here at Wordfence. Back in 2011, I founded Wordfence with my co-founder, Carrie Boyd. My own WordPress site got hacked, and that was not a very pleasant experience, and I figured out it was a vulnerability in Tim Thumb that was the underlying issue there, and that the hacker used to break in, and it was a 0 day, and published the research and so on, and I wanted to solve the security problem that I had encountered and that I discovered a lot of folks who use WordPress have, and so Carrie and I created the Wordfence plugin, and it grew from 2012 when we launched it, I think it was April, really quickly until 2015 when we started hiring, and now we're a team of about 40 people, a global team mostly based in the US. And our mission is to make the web and the WordPress community more secure. To that end, today we're announcing that our vulnerability database that we launched at Black Hat this year as part of our Wordfence Intelligence launch, we're making it completely free. And we're actually launching a web interface which is quite sophisticated, and I'll be chatting with Chloe about that in a few minutes. And in addition to that, we're launching an API that lets you download the entire database at no cost, and you can use it for personal use, and you can also use it for commercial use. So it is literally, we're just giving it away. And our goal is to really achieve that mission of making the WordPress community safer and making the web safer overall. Chloe, why don't we chat for a little bit about what we're launching? So I guess there's two parts. There's the web interface and the API. So why don't we start off with the web interface and just kind of talk through that a little bit. So when you arrive on the web interface, and I suspect some folks watching this might be like in another window checking it out already. If you want to explore this while we're chatting, you can go to wordfence.com/threat-intel. At the time of the publication of this video, which will be tomorrow, it's now Tuesday evening in Colorado. We're launching this tomorrow, and it'll be live, so you can actually play with this while we're chatting. But talk us through the dashboard a little bit. When someone first arrives on the user interface, what do they see?
Yeah, so right when you get to the dashboard, you're going to get a few statistics on attack data related to WordPress vulnerabilities, and you'll be able to see things like the top 10 unique vulnerabilities being exploited, and then figure out more information about those vulnerabilities by clicking on it to see the vulnerability record. And there's also the most recently added vulnerabilities and the researcher leaderboard all on the dashboard for you.
Okay, and so that's kind of the jump-off point is the dashboard. And there's a search interface on the dashboard that they can use to search vulnerabilities. What criteria can they search on, and how can they filter using that search?
Yeah, so there's a lot of flexibility within the search feature. So you can essentially search for vulnerabilities using a software slug. You can search using the software name. You can filter down by vulnerability type, like arbitrary file uploads, cross-site scripting. You can even sort and filter by CVSS scoring, and there's all sort of conventions you can use to kind of narrow down your search and figure out more about a specific vulnerability.
And so if you're a researcher wanting to search on a particular criteria, I mean, that's super helpful, like being able to search on a slug or something like that. And so within the web interface, there are individual vulnerability records. When you find a vulnerability using the search or using another navigational path, what sort of data do we have on each vulnerability?
Yeah, so we're going to be providing you with a CVSS score, a description explaining a little bit of details about the vulnerability. You're going to get the CWE, which is the vulnerability type, such as cross-site scripting, SQL injection. You're also going to get the affected versions. You're going to get the patched version, the researcher that's contributed to finding the vulnerability, along with some additional references so you can find some more information about specific vulnerabilities.
So speaking of researchers, you're head of product for this, and I think one of the things you're really pushing for is to create a profile for individual researchers within the web interface that could raise their their profile and their sort of online presence to give credit where credit is due. So I guess there's a couple things there. On the vulnerability record, you've got the researcher listed that found the vulnerability.
Correct,
Right? And then if you click on that, you are taken to a page that, what does that show?
That will show the researcher's name along with the number of vulnerabilities found in the last 30 days by that researcher, along with their all-time vulnerability count, and then all of the vulnerabilities that researcher has found will be on that page as well.
So it's kind of like a profile page for a researcher.
Yeah.
And there's a rumor that you're going to be improving that fairly soon. What are you going to be doing there?
Yeah, so the goal is to have it be editable by any researcher so that they can include information such as a biography, a link to their Twitter, a link to their website, any way to... Sorry.
No worries. So they're actually going to be able to edit their own profile page, and you're going to somehow authenticate them, and that can kind of become a home for all of their vulnerabilities online, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, one of the things we want to do is really give credit to the researchers out there that are creating or finding all of these vulnerabilities, which is a lot of hard work, and raise their profile to improve the job prospects. And this is kind of a resource that a researcher can point to and say, this is all of the work that I've done in the WordPress space with regards to plugin vulnerabilities, theme vulnerabilities, and WordPress core. So that's pretty exciting. So there's another part to this, which is the API. And that's kind of interesting because we are not holding back anything, are we?
Nope, nothing at all.
Yeah, I mean, we're literally, the API endpoint that we're launching tomorrow lets you download the entire data set in JSON format, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, so they're going to put us out of business starting tomorrow. As soon as they download our database, they're going to republish it, and we're not needed anymore.
Yeah.
So our goal, our point of view that we're really expressing here is that vulnerabilities are created by the research community out there, and they should be a community resource. And so we're making that data available to everyone. As a community resource, we're not. There's no delay between when we add a vulnerability to the database and when it actually appears on the API endpoint in the web interface, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so just to unpack that a little bit, our plugin, our premium plugin has firewall rules that are rules that protect against attackers that want to exploit these vulnerabilities. And we delay those rules for 30 days for our free customers, and our premium customers who pay us get those in real time. But the difference with the vulnerability database, because we consider the vulnerabilities themselves to be a community resource, is that those are going out the moment we add them.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so I think you're actually adding a feature on our product roadmap that's going to provide sort of real-time data on when we add a new vulnerability, right? Like webhooks.
Oh yeah, webhooks.
Right.
Yeah.
So so I guess there's going to be a webhook that folks can kind of hook into for. I think you're still designing it, so we'll figure out how that works.
Yeah.
But the idea is that there's a way for folks out there to be alerted in real time when we add something to the database.
Yeah.
Okay. So they can either pull the entire database or pull a vulnerability associated with a particular product or something like that.
Correct.
I guess we'll figure that out. But the goal for us is to provide real-time awareness on when a new vulnerability is added to the database. So we're actually including attack data with these vulnerabilities in the database, right? Under certain conditions.
Yeah, that's correct. So essentially, whenever we have a custom firewall rule written for a vulnerability, you'll be able to see the attack data related to that specific vulnerability when accessing the vulnerability record.
Right, and so just to be clear, so some vulnerabilities have a firewall rule that's made specifically to protect against that vulnerability being exploited.
That's correct,
right?
Yeah.
And those we can provide pretty accurate attack counts, because anytime someone is blocked by that firewall rule, we know that they're targeting that specific vulnerability. Yeah. So in that case, you'll get attack data, pretty accurate attack data for that specific vulnerability. But then we've got some generic rules too, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And those those will give you a generic overview of how many attacks are being blocked for those generic vulnerability types. We won't have specific data on each individual vulnerability that's protected by that rule, however.
Okay, so in the database, if a vulnerability has attack counts, that means that it's got its own custom firewall rule.
Yeah,
and if it doesn't have attack counts, it means that it's most likely protected by a generic firewall rule. Yeah. Okay, and so like an example of a generic firewall rule might be cross-site scripting, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, what would be another one?
SQL injection.
There you go. Okay.
Arbitrary file uploads.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, just to name a couple.
Okay. And I mean, those generic rules protect against a whole host of vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And the benefit for you by us having generic rules is that you don't have a set of, one rule for every single vulnerability out there, which is just improves performance a little bit from a firewall perspective. Yeah. So this is free for commercial use. Yeah. And so our desire here is that we actually want you to take this vulnerability database and productize it. You can create any kind of product you want, whether you're an enterprise that is protecting your own network or you have your own customers, go ahead and use the data. And I guess one of the things we're including with each vulnerability record is remediation instructions, right?
Yeah. So it'll say something like update to the patched version or newer, or it might say something like remove this plugin because there's no available patch.
Okay. And so those instructions can appear on a user interface.
Yep.
So if, let's say, a hosting company is productizing the data, they could. Let's just explore a specific scenario here, right? Yep. So you're a hosting company. You've got 15 million customers out there. You've got a massive infrastructure, file systems with WordPress sites that are installed. And I guess you're going to grab our database from the API endpoint, and then periodically refresh it. Yep. Probably bring it into your own MySQL instance. Import the data. It's in JSON, so it's machine readable. And then you've got the slug, yep. Which would identify the directory path that the plugin would be stored in. Correct. And you've also got the version of a particular vulnerable plugin or theme or core version, right? And so you could scan the file system for plugins or themes with those slugs, and then go and look at the readme.txt to get the version number and identify vulnerable plugins and themes.
Correct.
And then alert the customer that they've got an issue with our remediation instructions.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's pretty awesome.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So, hosting companies can grab this database and then periodically refresh it. But as Chloe mentioned, we're going to be launching webhooks over the coming weeks so that you are alerted when you need to refresh the database. And then turn it into a product that does a great job of protecting your customers and alerting them when they've got a vulnerability, and even giving them the instructions that they need to fix the vulnerability or whatever they need to do about it, which is awesome. So where do we get our vulnerabilities from? It's our own research.
Yes. So we do our own research. We have researchers that submit vulnerabilities directly to us. We're a CNA, so we assign CVEs to all the vulnerabilities that are submitted to us. And then we also monitor all other vulnerability sources that we can find, such as other databases, and we also monitor the CVE list, and we monitor change sets and closed and restored plugins.
So you guys, your team actually has like automated tools that are looking at change logs and I think also plugins that are pulled from the repository.
Yeah, that's correct.
So you're kind of alerted when a plugin is yanked from the repo by the plugin team, and you'll go in and take a look and see what the issue is there and if there's a vulnerability. So it's a whole bunch of sources that we're bringing together, and I guess the goal is to shorten the time from the existence of the vulnerability to actually discovering it and adding it to our database. And you were having a conversation with me about hiring right before we came on, which we are. More about that at the end. So making this database freely available to everyone online, it benefits various groups of folks, within the security community and people outside the security community. So we chatted about hosting companies already. I think another group is security analysts who are cleaning a hacked site. So I guess they have a customer who's had a compromise, and one of the things that they might be doing is looking at the access logs and seeing the slugs of plugins and themes that have been accessed. And what would their workflow be from taking a slug and kind of using our database to help figure out if there was a vulnerable plugin or theme exploited?
Yeah, so what you could do is essentially go to the search functionality and then search by software slug, and then you could figure out if that particular software has had any previous vulnerabilities, and you could match that up with whatever versions are installed on the hacked and now cleaned site, and figure out if that was maybe the source of the compromise, and then you can report that information back to your customer or client to let them know how their site was compromised so that they can prevent that from happening again in
So
the
it's part of
future.
their security report, right?
Yeah, correct.
And so they would take that slug, they'd use the search functionality that we chatted about earlier, and search for that slug. They'd get a plugin or a theme, and then see all the vulnerabilities associated and the versions. And basically complete the flow that you described. So that's pretty awesome. I mean, that's a really valuable resource for security analysts. And there's no our database is current. There's no sort of limitation on it, right? It's not delayed by 30 days, and it's complete data as well. We're not sort of giving you half the data and you have to pay for the rest, right? And our intention is this isn't a bait and switch. I mean, it's our goal is to really keep this free, for we're not planning on charging for it, a year from now and just getting you hooked or anything like that. But pen testers who are working on a client site or infrastructure, I guess they would start by enumerating plugins and themes, and what's the workflow from there?
Yeah, so essentially pen testers could use this to enumerate plugins and themes, and then once they figure out what plugin and theme is installed on the site and perhaps a version, they could take that, go to the database and see what vulnerabilities might be in that version, if there is any, and then try to use that to get into the site and provide those details to their clients at the end of the pen test.
Awesome. All right, resulting in a much more secure site after they've fixed any security holes that might exist. And then WordPress users evaluating plugins and themes if they want to find out if there's a vulnerability associated with a version they might have installed. They can just do a search for the product, right?
Correct.
So what happens if they find a product that has a whole bunch of vulnerabilities associated with it in the past? I mean, what does that mean?
Yeah, so that means that developer is probably very good at actively maintaining and creating a secure plugin for users to use. It means they're actively looking at ways to improve their product, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing when there's a lot of vulnerabilities in a plugin or theme. It just means that they're doing the work to make sure that plugin and theme is more secure for their users.
Right. I mean, a vulnerability, and I keep saying this in the various videos that we do, but it bears repeating. It's just a bug, right? And a security researcher who's found a vulnerability has found a bug in software, and so it's sort of a QA function, a software quality assurance function, and it's a celebrity bug because it's a vulnerability, and those are scary, and we've got to make the hacker movies out there have made sure that we're scared of hackers and vulnerabilities and so on. But it's kind of like having a product that has a big and really talented QA team that's pounding on this product and finding all the possible bugs, and you're going to end up with a long list of bugs, but much more solid software, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's a good sign. It means that the software is alive and vibrant and vital and is being fixed when the research community out there finds a new vulnerability. And so researchers can use this database as well if they want to study vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah, exactly. One of the ways I started getting into vulnerability research myself was looking at other vulnerabilities out there, downloading the old version of it that's vulnerable, and then trying to find the vulnerability myself by going through the source code and by playing with the plugin in the vulnerable state. And that was a great way for me to learn. So I'm excited to see what this can do for researchers out there.
I know that you've really been pushing for that, and we've chatted a lot about raising the profile of researchers and giving credit, and we think of ourselves in this role really as just a repository, a place that the vulnerabilities can land and then kind of be redistributed to the community as efficiently and as effectively as possible. And I think Chloe and her team have done a really great job at implementing that. The user interface looks amazing. So congrats. So our as an organization, we're not just creating this free product and then leaving it alone. And we're actually really passionate about securing the online community and WordPress as a whole. And so we're investing in this vulnerability database, and we're in it for the long term. One of the things that you and I have chatted about, and that's on the cards for this, is creating a financial incentive for security researchers. And Chloe's working on that. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, but we do know that it's going to be a very strong incentive. So keep an eye. As you can tell, Chloe's really excited. So keep an eye on the space. We'll have an announcement January, February time-ish, something like that. The team's been working really hard, and we have a couple other things on our plate, but I think that's probably a reasonable timeline there. As we mentioned, we're creating an editable profile for security researchers, and again, the goal is to raise the profile of researchers, give them credit for their work, and give them a place where they can come and kind of edit that online presence and point it to their research blog or wherever they want to. And then we're including webhooks, which are coming soon. Right now, I think, Chloe, you're saying we've got about 10,000 vulnerabilities in the database?
Yeah, if you count them by plugins, themes, and core vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and you gotta be careful there, right? Because some vulnerability databases out there that actually sell their database will count their vulnerabilities, like one for each version of the particular software that is affected by the vulnerability, to really kind of boost those numbers. So it's a little bit disingenuous. The way we count it is just like a unique vulnerability per plugin or theme or core, right? Yeah. So we don't count like if a vulnerability affects two versions of WordPress core, that's just one vulnerability, right?
Correct.
Okay, cool. And then you guys are continually adding to that, obviously, on an ongoing basis. And then I think there's some sort of really old legacy vulnerabilities out there that you're working with researchers to include as well. But all the leading edge stuff and is in there and live, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Awesome. And then the vulnerabilities in the database will actually appear as we release our firewall rules to protect against those vulnerabilities to premium. Well, I guess that they don't quite. In some cases, they don't appear in the database immediately because we're going through a responsible disclosure process, correct, right? Yeah. So how does that work? How are we able to release a firewall rule that protects against a vulnerability, but not kind of alert everyone to what the vulnerability is?
Yeah, so essentially we just obfuscate the firewall rule to make sure that you can't find any distinguishable information in it. So that can help protect our users while also making sure that we don't give out information that could assist bad threat actors.
Exactly, yeah. And so there's this responsible disclosure process that we go through, and we know about a vulnerability, we know how to exploit it. We're the good guys. Yeah. I think we are,
I think
right?
So.
and so we work with the vendor confidentially to let them know what the issue is, and then give them kind of a time frame to fix it, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, and then once that responsible disclosure process is complete, then it goes into the database.
That's correct.
Okay. So that's kind of the timeline. If we know of a vulnerability that's already public knowledge or has gone through the responsible disclosure process, it gets added to the database immediately. Otherwise, there's a wait time until the vendor has actually released a fix, and then it's added to the database, and that's kind of standard for the industry. If they want to visit the web interface of your awesome vulnerability database, what's the URL?
Yeah, so www.wordfence.com/threat-intel.
Okay. And then as I mentioned earlier, we're recording this on Tuesday night in Colorado, rather snowy and blizzardy Colorado outside. but it's warm in here.
It is,
So
yeah.
there's that. But we're launching it tomorrow on Wednesday, and Matt and Scott and the engineering team are going to be putting the API live. It's actually live already, but it requires authentication. So they're removing that to make the vulnerability database completely free, the API completely free. And we don't know what that URL is going to be just yet, but Matt and the guys are going to let us know tomorrow, and we'll include that in the blog post. And so you can check out the post that is included with this video, and that'll give you the information you want. And then we're hiring, right?
Yeah.
So I guess visit defiant.com, and Chloe is adding to her team. And we're looking for folks that are going to be doing threat research on WordPress vulnerabilities, so plugins, themes, core, and folks that can help triage vulnerabilities as well for this effort. As I said, we're investing in this. We're in this for the long term. So definitely keep an eye on defiant.com, and we'll be posting the roles there. And we look forward to working with threat researchers out there to help make the community safer. And we look forward to making this vulnerability database freely available, both as a web interface, but also via an API to vendors and developers and researchers out there to help keep the WordPress community safer. Thanks for watching.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.